I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to the biblical slaves of Egypt, you didn't build that. On the show tonight, Jeb on the family beat. Is Chris Christie getting beat? And Ben Carson's fresh beats. But first, the doctor is in the hot seat. For most of this week, that hot seat has been occupied by one Marco Rubio. But now 2 stories published in the past 24 hours have put Ben Carson in the proverbial barrel. The first is from CNN, which looked into Carson's claims that he's made over the years about having had a very violent set of outbursts as a kid. CNN interviewed a bunch of Carson's childhood friends, and they say they don't remember him being a violent type. Today in Florida, though, Carson stood his ground.
One of the ones where I threw a rock and broke someone's glasses, that occurred when I was maybe about 7 or 8. The attempted stabbing incident occurred when I was 13 or 14. What's another incident? Give me another one.
The punching with the lock.
Trying to hit my mother in the head with a hammer. That was around the same time as the stabbing incident.
And with the 2 incidents before your mother, were those classmates? Were they friends? Were they neighbors? How do you characterize? Because our investigation could not find these people.
Well, why would you be able to find them? What makes you think you would be able to find them? Unless I tell you who they are. And if they come forward on their own because of your story, that's fine, but I'm not going to expose them.
Do you think your classmates?
So lots of questions there being raised on the campaign trail for Carson. And the other relevant news comes from BuzzFeed, which located a video from a 1998 commencement speech that Carson gave, in which he described his unconventional theory about why the pyramids in Egypt were originally built.
My own personal theory is that Joseph built the pyramids in order to store grain. Now, all the archaeologists think that they were made for the pharaoh's graves, but, you know, it would have to be something awfully big when you stop and think about it. And I don't think it would just disappear over the course of time to store that much grain.
So here's how Carson responded today to this controversy.
I think that's, some people believe in the Bible, like I do, and don't find that to be silly at all, and believe that God created the earth and don't find that to be silly at all.
John, how damaging are these 2 flaps likely to be to Carson's campaign?
Well, let us begin by saying, as predicted on this show, that the vetting would now begin of Ben Carson, now that he is by many metrics the front runner. It's begun. I think
co-front runner. I don't think there's too many metrics where he's the front runner.
Well, co-front runner.
Yeah.
Fair, but no doubt about that.
Yeah.
The Egypt story is not anywhere near as potentially damaging as the biography story, because you can survive being a Bible literalist in the Republican Party. You cannot survive being a fabricator. And if Ben Carson's bio, his Horatio Alger myth is up from nothing, the whole thing, if that turns out to be fraudulent, he is in big trouble.
First of all, no one's going to prove a negative, number one. Number two, if he exaggerated his violent tendencies, I understand credibility matters, but I don't understand why people think if he exaggerated how violent he was, that's a problem.
Well, I think obviously there's a little bit of a weird element to that, for sure. But I just do think, you said credibility matters. I think it really matters. And I think that part of his drama of his story is, he obviously was born poor in Detroit, no one doubts that, right? But that he transformed himself from being a violent youth to being a respected neurosurgeon. If that turns out to be fake, it's just bad.
There are a bunch of people who want Ben Carson to be stopped from other campaigns who've looked into his background and believe that he has exaggerated and made stuff up serially about lots of his background. He handled things fine today, and I don't think his core supporters will matter. But if Ben Carson wants to end up being the nominee, he needs more credibility. And the dirty little secret here is there are doubts in the Republican community and in the media about who this guy is because most people still don't know him.
And let me tell you, in that story that was written by CNN exploring this issue, the campaign's response was troubling because they basically said, this is a witch hunt. They can't respond that way anymore. Okay, in other Ben Carson news, the man is on the radio. Take a listen to the spot that the Carson campaign is running in urban markets like Detroit, Memphis, and Birmingham.
Kill, vote, inspire, vote, revive, vote. Ben Carson Carson 2016. Vote and support Ben Carson for our next president and be awesome.
America became a great nation early on, not because it was flooded with politicians, but because it was flooded with people.
Ben Carson, he's not the only one on the radio. I'm just like really getting into that beat. Donald Trump also getting a lot of attention today for releasing the first ads of his TV campaign, sorry about that, because they are not on TV.
Donald Trump learned the values of hard work, determination, and faith at an early age. He went on to build one of the world's most iconic brands and companies, which employs thousands of people. Donald Trump is running for president because politicians are all talk and no action. They will never make our country great again.
If the people of Iowa vote for me, you'll never be disappointed. I don't disappoint people. I produce. Together, we're going to make America great again. I'm Donald Trump, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Donald J. Trump for President, Inc.
So, Mark, we have two ads on the radio and the radio. What is the strategy driving each of these ads?
Well, the Carson ad, is going to get mocked by a lot of people, but he is, I think, quite admirably trying to expand his reach and show that he will try to expand the size of the tent of the Republican Party, reach younger voters, reach African-American voters as a Republican. Trump, I think, is trying to convince people that he is a candidate who can inspire and hold his supporters. And I think that's what a lot of this is about for him.
The Carson ads, forget about what you think about the quality of them. If a Democrat, if an African-American Democrat did ads of this kind on urban radio, no one would think anything of it. It would be the most conventional thing in the world. The fact that Carson's doing it should be unremarkable to people. You can criticize the creative, but it should be unremarkable.
Unremarkable and admirable.
And admirable, sure, admirable. But I just think unremarkable mostly. The Trump ad surprises me given how conventional it seems. It does not, we've been waiting for a long time for Donald Trump to go on the air. That to me doesn't capture the renegade spirit of Donald Trump. It seems like pretty much a cookie cutter ad.
Well, to some extent, Carson and Trump are both playing against type in these ads. Carson, who's usually seen as pretty low key and not a lot of showmanship, is doing an ad that's got showmanship. And Trump is being more conventional. Obviously, he's using a woman narrator there because he does much better so far, or better so far with men than with women, and he wants to try to appeal to female voters. And I think the message of those ads is his message, but not bombastic, not as bombastic.
That's fair enough. I think the interesting question continues to be, and we all have thought this for months, when Trump finally engages in the electronic media war, whether it's radio or TV, will he do it with a show of force? Is he willing to spend money? How much is he willing to spend? Open his checkbook. It's interesting that he in particular has decided to go to radio rather than making a big statement TV thing, a big statement TV campaign to flex muscles and say, I'm going to spend.
So answer that question. Why are these two guys doing radio? Carson has done television already, but why is Trump starting on radio, not television? Why is Carson doing this on radio? Well,
targeted radio messages really work. There's still a lot of people who listen to the radio in America, and especially conservative America. We know about the conservative radio phenomenon and the behemoths that like Rush Limbaugh and others who dominate that space. A lot of conservatives listen to a lot of radio. Smart to try to reach them that way.
So amongst the Trump doubters, there are people who said he wouldn't file to be on the ballot. Well, he started to file to be on the ballot in places. The current doubters say, or the current doubt of the doubters is he's not really going to spend big. He's too cheap to open his wallet. Some people say the reason he's starting with radio is to try to get away with spending a relatively paltry sum of a couple $100,000.
And be able to say these advertising.
Be able to say I'm advertising and be able to say we're clever, we're outfoxing everybody because radio is more targeted and it's better. It is still the case that until Trump is willing to spend millions on television ads, the doubters have a reason to doubt.
They do.
And this radio buy only stokes the view of those who say he's not in it to win it.
I mean, look, when you have Bernie Sanders, avowed Democratic socialist now, on the air with television and spending millions of dollars on it, and Donald Trump is still not on the air, I think the doubters have a reason to doubt.
Yeah, radio, though, also for Trump, I think it allows him to, not I wouldn't say be Reagan-esque, but it does allow him to kind of change the breadth of the sort of image that he has.
The tone in some way.
The tone, and also just prove that he can perform in that medium without the bombast of the rally and the Trump visuals. I think that's a good thing for him.
Yeah, okay. All right. When we come back, is this the best week or the worst week for Chris Christie? And we sit down with Bush 43's former media mastermind, Mark MCAT McKinnon. We are back in exactly 60 seconds. If you look at it one way, this could be the best week Chris Christie has had in a long, long time. But paradoxically, it could also end up being the worst week. This raw, emotional, moving, kind of extraordinary video of Christie talking about drug addiction has been viewed more than 5 million times on Facebook. That is the definition of viral. And many of our Republican sources tell us that they are now increasingly and surprisingly bullish on Christie's prospects for a Lazarus-style comeback in the Republican nomination fight. At the same time, however, tonight we will find out if Christie's national polling numbers have slumped to the point that he gets kicked off the primetime debate stage in Milwaukee next week based on the Fox Business debate criteria. So, Mark, here's my question. If Christie, in terms of this debate, does get the boot, will that totally overshadow and quash everything else that's going on good in his world right now?
The biggest problem Christie has right now is money. He does not have a lot in the kitty, and he needs to raise it. On the one hand, I'd be curious to see if he's going to raise money off that video and off this momentum that he's built. Maybe he'll make some small dollar donation, get some small dollar contributions. Being on the other debate stage, though, being kicked off the main stage could hurt him with big donors. But I will say this. Christie is the kind of guy who will make something of this. He said today he's going to show up in Milwaukee. If he has to debate on the undercard, he will. He's the kind of guy, I think, who can turn that disappointment into something positive.
Look, I've always been skeptical of the argument. You've made this argument a few times that, like, at certain times, that you could being on the B stage, on the non-main stage, could be a good thing if you dominated it, right? You know, Lindsey Graham dominated the last one, the last undercard, and he didn't get anywhere. I think it's possible in this circumstance that Christie, with fewer rivals and fewer stars, could have a huge night on the undercard, and if it combines with genuine stuff going out on the campaign trail and this video going viral and the positive media attention, that this could in some weird way work to his advantage. It's possible, but it's a narrow needle to try to thread.
Of the remaining establishment candidates in this race, Bush, Christie, Rubio, Kasich, no one is bigger than Christie in confidence that if it comes down to one of the four surviving him, that it will be him. And that confidence means a lot, and he's showing it out on the campaign trail.
Well, and look, we've come back to what the reason why we all thought back in 2013 why Chris Christie, when he won re-election, would be a very, very strong player for the Republican nomination. Some of that had to do with donors, but a lot of it had to do with the natural skill that's on display in that video, and that, in this chaotic field, will continue to serve him well.
The reason Mitt Romney almost put him on the ticket, despite all his vetting problems, was he was a great brawler. And this is a race with 15 candidates. Brawling is a pretty good skill to have if you're trying to climb over 14 other bodies to get to the top of the heap. I believe that whether he gets in the debate or not, Christie knows smart enough to consolidate the momentum he has and focus, as he has been, on New Hampshire, where none of the establishment candidates have caught on yet.
You're going to have a few more moments like that, though.
All right, it seems like we haven't been, if it seems to you like we haven't been talking about the Democratic presidential race much lately, it's because it has been a relative snooze, so we haven't been. All the wins right now seem to be at the back of Hillary Clinton, who is regaining traction in New Hampshire polls and thumping Bernie Sanders in the other early voting states, including in Iowa and especially in South Carolina. But now, Sanders has finally done something that a lot of political elites have suggested he needed to do to change the game. After passing on the topic of Hillary Clinton's emails during the one and only so far Democratic debate out in Las Vegas, listen to what the senator told the Wall Street Journal when they asked him about Clinton's emails and whether they were, as a political issue, valid and fair to take up.
I think those are valid questions. All that I was saying is that I didn't get it. You have 12 seconds to say these things. There is a process. There's an investigation going on right now. I did not say, hey, end the investigation. That it's silly. That's not what I said. There is an investigation going on. But I do not want this campaign to be just about Hillary Clinton's emails. Let the investigation proceed unimpeded, and that's fine.
A much different tone and set of remarks than he gave in the debate. A Clinton spokesperson responded to what Sanders said, quote, "It's disappointing Senator Sanders and his campaign strategists have chosen to change direction and engage the type of personal attacks that they previously said he wouldn't do." John, does Bernie Sanders seem to have his heart in this line of attack? And does he need to go further than that to make it an effective one?
First of all, I think it's really funny the way the Clinton campaign responded. It was like as if he had gone, like, really attacked her. You look at that video, and it's kind of weak beer. His heart is not in this, not in going more negative, I don't think, and I've written some about this. And I think he's got to figure out a way to sharpen the contrast. He can't. I agree with him and his team that it can't be personal, but the contrasts have to be sharper, and he's got to be more forceful, I think, in making.
I think the email thing is a total distraction. He did gum it up by how he handled it in the debate, and he could have handled it differently. To me, if he's going to beat her, it's going to be on the contrast on issues.
Yeah, that's fine.
And not on the emails. Let the investigation take care of itself. But he's going to have to make a character and ideological argument against her, which I believe he does have his heart in.
But I think the thing about this is it seems like he's trying to get a do-over, right? He ruled it out emphatically on the debate stage. Then he heard from a bunch of people saying, you shouldn't have done that. And so today he's trying to, like, put it back on the table in some mealy-mouthed way. As I say, do contrast on areas that you're comfortable doing them and do them aggressively. And I think on you and I agree about this. They should be on issues because that is where he's comfortable, and that is where there are genuine contrasts between the two of them.
Yeah, the next Democratic debate is obviously going to be a huge thing. First of all, there's only going to be 3 people on the stage and not 5, so they're going to have more time to talk. And I think Sanders is going to have to come in prepared and be ready to talk about whatever comes up. And, of course, as been the case all along, particularly in the wake of the CNBC debate on the Republican side, what the moderators choose to focus on will be a big deal. Because I don't think Sanders is going to bring stuff up on his own.
But you and I don't disagree about one thing also, which is that on a lot of issues, he's closer to where the Democratic base is than she is. Yeah. She's got things to say. All right, up next, we will explore Jeb Bush's putative, hypothetical, daddy issues. Right after this.
Can't beat them, meet them. There's a hot new political book to be released next Tuesday, but word about the book is already out, and a lot of people are talking about it. President George H.W. Bush is back in the news because of this upcoming John Meacham biography of the former president, in which he cooperated and his wife Barbara Bush cooperated. In it, Bush 41 takes some newsworthy shots at his son, Bush 43's advisors, including Dick Cheney, whom he called a, quote, iron ass. He didn't mean that in a nice way. And Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, whom 41 said served his son badly. In a statement after reports of the book came out last night and this morning, Rumsfeld shot back by saying Bush 41 was, quote, getting up in years and misjudges Bush 43, who I found made his own decisions. And, quote, Rumsfeld and Bush 41 have had a rivalry for a long time. The former Vice President Cheney defended his role in the administration and claims that he was a puppet of his daughter and his wife in an interview he did that ran last night on Fox News Channel.
I've had much worse said about me than anything he ever thought. And I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what he meant by those diary entries. I fully admit that after 9/11, I saw my role as being as tough and aggressive as needed to be to carry out the president's policy, 43's policy, to make sure we didn't get hit again.
Jeb Bush also took the TV airwaves to defend both his brother and his brother's administration.
My brother's a big boy. His administration was shaped by his thinking, his reaction to the attack in 9/11. I think my dad, like a lot of people that love George, wanted to try to create a different narrative, perhaps, just because that's natural to do, right? But George would say, this was under my watch. I was commander-in-chief. I was the leader, and I accept personal responsibility for what happened, both the good and the bad. And I think that's the right way to look at it.
So Bush 41 is saying that his son was unduly influenced by Cheney and Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld, Cheney, Jeb, and Bush 43 all are basically disagreeing. So what impact, if any, will this book's release have on Jeb's campaign?
Wow, it's hard to say. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, just step back from that for a second. I mean, you know, one of the things that what's getting all the attention is George Herbert Walker Bush criticizing Rumsfeld, criticizing Cheney. He also criticizes his son. And he says, you know, it's not Dick Cheney's fault that he had so much influence. It's my son, the president's fault, as he refers to him, doesn't mention his name. He says it's the president's fault. It's kind of an amazing thing to have a father criticizing his son in a way that a lot of other Republicans would, in a way that a lot of Americans would. George Herbert Walker Bush obviously has a lot of respect. Just a kind of an extraordinary spectacle. We'll get to Jeb Bush in a second, but it's an interesting and a kind of an amazing moment to see this kind of internal Bush family drama playing out in the pages of a book by a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian.
If you look at how Jeb Bush has addressed the book in that interview and then on the stump today, I think it's a good sign for him. This is the most smooth and comfortable I've seen him in talking about his brother and his father and the kind of the Bush legacy in the entire campaign. And without a doubt, if he's going to have a comeback, these issues are going to come back up. He's going to have to talk about them. So I think the book may be, in some ways, a good thing for him to talk about his family in a way which, for whatever reason, he's more comfortable.
Well, it's certainly true that he seemed more comfortable there, and it's also certainly true that it might kind of flush out some of this stuff out of the system and maybe finally purge that discussion. On the other hand, I just don't think it's ever good for Jeb Bush to have to be in a position where he's defending his brother. It just, to me, that's a kind of a no-win situation for Jeb Bush, both in terms of a general election and really in terms of the Republican Party. I don't see how you win that argument. All right, there's something else to talk about here separately. Poppy Bush seemed to be on Jeb's mind yesterday in New Hampshire when some students asked him what it was like to have a father who lived in the White House. Here's his answer.
My dad was such an inspiration for me that whenever I made a mistake, all he had to do was say, "I'm disappointed in you." And it would send me into a deep spiraling depression for days. Because I admired him so much, I respected him so much. He didn't have to lift a hand. He taught me right and wrong by how he acted, how he behaved, how he treated others. And so what it was like to grow up like that, total blessing.
So, Mark, we've talked a lot over the last number of months about how Jeb is dealing with his brother, 43, and the specter of that. I was just talking about it just now. Here's the question, though. He's there talking about his father, so it kind of raises the question, does Jeb Bush have some daddy issues?
Here's the strange thing about this whole Bush problem. You know, your view is it always hurts to talk about him. Both Bushes are very popular within the Republican Party. In the general election, more complex. But it's strange to me that, and I think Jeb Bush sees this, and I'm sure his pollsters telling him the same thing, that it's tying him in so much knots when the reality is, again, if Jeb Bush gets back in this, he's going to deploy his family even more than he has so far publicly.
It's true that they're both popular in the Republican Party, but you and I both know, because we've done these focus groups around the country, and you still hear a lot of Republicans who say, I like George Herbert Walker Bush great, I like George W. Bush, but I don't want a third one. That's one too many Bush. So it plays into a dynastic thing, and the dynastic thing, I think, hurts him, even if they are individually popular within the party.
He's not going to change his name between now and Iowa caucuses. So I think embracing this and trying to use it is his only hope as part of a comeback. And I'll say again, there's no reason to talk about Jeb Bush unless we're talking about him in the context of can he come back. And I still believe that the way he's behaved this week, we're 4 days into the week here, he's performing well enough to come back now, without a doubt. But
do you think that kind of almost, there are various moments in the last couple of days where this has come through and people have noted it in the press, and it's been like a therapy session. Do you think that tonally, the way he's talking about his father, like from the couch in some ways, because that's how that came across to me, does that work? Is that effective?
It's not flawless, but it could be worse.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. All right. When we come back, we asked former Bush advisor Mark McKinnon for his thoughts on the Bush 41 biography we've just been talking about. After these words from our sponsors.
We are back talking more about that new book about the Bushes and about the presidential campaign with Mark McKinnon, the ambidextrous political media strategist, a former advisor to President George W. Bush, and John McCain and many others, including, once upon a time, some Democrats. The Bushes always say we hate to be put on the couch. There's no way to look at this except to see them being put on some level on the couch, given the timing and the nature of what's being reported. What do you think this impact will be on the Bush family of this thing coming out the way it is now?
Well, I think the statute of limitations on discretion has run its course. It's run out. And I think I think the former president, George H.W., is saying some things that, a lot of people agree with. And he's probably thought for a long time, but as a matter of discretion while his son was president and a certain amount of time afterward. But I think I think he's saying the obvious, and he doesn't absolve the president of responsibility. But says some things that, he's thinking, obviously, about legacy and the family and wanted to get some things off his chest.
Well, why are both George W. Bush and Jeb Bush saying, well, this is Dad just being Dad, but we don't really think it's right?
Well, the president's just saying he disagrees. This is an opinion, right? This is the former president, H.W., expressing his opinion. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. And then the president, George W., has a different opinion about it.
Let me ask you this question. We talked about this a little earlier in the show. Jeb Bush has had to deal with the specter of his brother throughout this entire campaign. Now he's got to deal with the kind of specter of his father. How do you think that affects him as a candidate? Does it at all? Does it matter?
I think it's helpful. I mean, I think it's helpful that his father, who is always seen as honest, and not somebody who dissembles at all, that he's saying something that's been on his mind, and again, something I think a lot of people agree with. I think people love George H.W. Bush across the board, and they'll feel some degree of sympathy for what he's saying, for the fact that he was discreet about it for a long time and just saying the obvious now. And I think it helps Jeb because it says what most people are thinking anyway.
Leave the book aside, leave the family aside, leave fundraising aside. What do you think are currently Jeb Bush's positive assets that could be contribute to a comeback if he has one?
Well, I mean, part of it's the family. I mean,
leave the family aside, leave the money aside. What else has he got?
I think he's got a real commitment to public service and seeing this thing through. And by the way, I think the last few days have actually been really good for him. I remember in New Hampshire when we got hammered into the snow by John McCain, 19 points down. The hardest part about a reset is just admitting that you're resetting, but that's what the press demands of you. There's a process.
But they've already done that. What
he's done that.
Asset? One asset is that he's committed to public service. I would say that most everybody in the race is committed to public service.
I mean, there's a long family history of true commitment.
Leave the family aside and leave the money aside. What else has he got?
But you can't leave his family. So that's part of his DNA.
That's all he's got is his family name and his money.
A commitment to public service, a strong record, and I think he's been really animated about it, and just in this reset period. And you really see the part of Jeb Bush that's that he feels very strongly about these things in a way that's connected to true public service, which I think is having, I think can have an impact.
I agree.
Let me ask you a two-part question, okay? So do you still believe that the traditional model in the Republican Party holds, which is to say that ultimately the nominee is likely to be an establishment nominee?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think part of our problem in politics is that we sort of are victims of confirmation bias and use history as a sort of judge about what's going to happen in the future. I think absolutely anything could happen.
Right. So you think there's no, at this point, an outsider campaign or an insider campaign are just as likely to be the nominee?
I think you could have two outsiders. I think you could have an establishment candidate, and I just think it's 52-card pickups.
So given the current dynamics being what they are, and given Bush's trouble, and given I know you've, like a lot of people, observed Chris Christie and his moment that he's having right now. So who's a likelier Republican nominee, Jeb Bush or Chris Christie?
I think Christie is having a great week. I mean, this is the moment for Chris Christie. I mean, I think this is his chance to really. I mean, we saw the softer side of Chris Christie. We know he's a tough guy, but we always wondered, does he have a compassionate side on a great issue for New Hampshire? My gosh, the whole idea of drug addiction. I mean, this is a big-time local issue that he's focused on, in a very compassionate way. That shows that that there's another side to Chris Christie. So I think people are going to give him another look, and I think it gives him a real boost in New Hampshire, potentially.
Right. You want to answer the question you were asked, who's more likely, Christie or Bush?
No.
Okay.
But do you believe that one moment like that, given everything that's happened for Christie, all the reasons that everybody had written him off, that one moment like that a campaign can turn?
Listen, remember, it was one moment like that vaulted Hillary Clinton to win New Hampshire in 2008. It was a moment just like that.
If you were working for the Carson campaign,
I mean, it's a moment that gives you some insight into who this guy is as a human being. Yeah. I mean, God, I saw that and I was like, I had no idea that guy was in there.
If you were working for the Carson campaign, would you care that most people in the establishment of the party didn't think your candidate could be the nominee, or doesn't matter?
If I were with the Carson campaign?
Yeah. Would that worry? Would you try to change that?
No.
Why not?
I don't think that has anything to do with his ability to be the nominee.
Well, if he could raise more money, for instance. I mean, a lot of people in the establishment say, we don't like Trump. We need someone to stop Trump. If you look at the polls, the person best positioned to stop Trump, you could argue the only person positioned to stop Trump is Carson.
That's true. I mean, if it really got to a point where it was either or, I think you'd see an establishment shift to Carson.
Right, but again, if Carson, for instance, could raise more money from the establishment,
I just don't think Carson's interested in sending that signal at this point in the campaign.
But why do you think that? What is it that makes you think? I mean, I think that right now more establishmentarians have come to the realization that Donald Trump could be the nominee. Most of them still think there's no chance for Carson to be the nominee. So why do you think the establishment would rally to Carson if it was a head-to-head between the two?
Because I think that if they thought that either one could be president, I'm not saying that that's where they think Carson is right now, but if they had the choice between the two, they'd go with Carson.
Because?
I think that they just think that he's more manageable.
They think he's more electable?
And more electable.
And more electable. Do you think Carson's more electable in a general than Trump?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
do.
All right. We left a lot of things hanging there, but maybe Mark will come back.
A lot of wise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark McKinnon. Up next, we sit down with the film director and friend of our program, Mr. Jay Roach, here to talk about his new film, Trumbo. We'll be right back in just 60 seconds.
You may have noticed that we talk a lot about Donald Trump on this program, but now we're going to talk about a different DT, Dalton Trumbo. The new biodrama starring Bryan Cranston opens tomorrow and is about the screenwriter, Dalton Trumbo, during the Blacklist era in mid-century Hollywood. The film's director, Jay Roach, from the Austin Powers series, Meet the Parents, and the personal favorite of these here co-hosts, Game Change, recently stopped by our studio to talk about why he sees this movie, set in 1947, as sort of being kind of like about 2015.
It happens over and over in history that people trying to make political hay use fear to get other people to conform. So it seems like that happens all the time. It seems like an old trick that all politicians use. All people who have causes try to get you scared of something and to get you to behave the way they want you to.
During this period, two things happened in America that I think young people today would just be stunned could occur in America not that long ago.
Yeah.
Japanese internment camps and blacklisting of people in Hollywood and elsewhere. Explain to young people the dynamic that occurred and how it could be that in America such a thing could happen.
That's what drove me to this. I remembered it vaguely, but I mostly associated it with the McCarthy hearings, and I didn't realize that in my own industry, people had turned on each other and tried to destroy each other's careers, using the idea that a sort of trumped up extrapolation from the fear of totalitarian communism, which was real. But in Hollywood, there had been huge union battles during the war and right after the war. And people like Hedda Hopper, Walt Disney, Ayn Rand, directors like Sam Wood got together and said, these troublemakers are inspiring our workers to rise up against us. They wouldn't if it wasn't for these few people. And so they formed a group called the Motion Picture Alliance to invite Congress to come and clean up Hollywood. And right away, people started informing on each other and saying, yeah, he was at a meeting and he knew somebody else who might have been a communist. And next thing you know, they're just crossing people off the lists that are allowed to work in Hollywood.
Like with every good political film, they're driven by characters, right? And if it's just about the ideas, they're kind of arid and not that interesting. What makes Trumbo, himself, Dalton Trumbo, such a compelling character in this movie?
And for me, that's the essence of it. It wasn't even the politics. I love stories, even with Game Change. Once I latched onto the story of Steve Schmidt and that guy's series of dilemmas, and then how he regretted so many of his choices, I understood, oh, that's a story. The larger political thing is sort of interesting, but for me it's only interesting in that it puts pressure on the character you're most interested in. In this case, Trumbo was such a great writer. He wrote Spartacus, he wrote Roman Holiday, he won 2 Academy Awards while he was blacklisted, and he was one of the funniest people I've ever read. His letters to his kids from home, to his enemies from jail. Right. He was the opposite of the stereotype of some kind of left-wing, humorless apparatchik. He was a true one-of-a-kind guy. And some of his friends were much more hardline, and we have Louis C.K. to play the hardline guy in our movie, who's just as funny, as a person could be.
Is there a lesson in this film?
I think it is to be wary of anybody who's trying to extrapolate from a fear. In this case, in the modern world, instead of totalitarian communism, it's terrorism. If you can get people focused on an external threat that's real and somehow redirect it to an internal threat that's not real, you can get people to do anything.
At times of war and fear, governments will do bad stuff, and it's very hard to resist or stop.
Not just governments, it can be individuals. Hedda Hopper was just a gossip columnist who happened to have 30-some-odd million readers, and she became a kind of fearmonger and a very hateful person. She drove Charlie Chaplin out of the country and to her deathbed, warned people not to let him come back.
Let me, before I ask you, I have a whole lot of questions more to ask, but I want to play a little bit of the movie before we do that. So let's play it a little bit and we'll talk about it.
How long were you in show business?
Till I was 15, but it was more show forced labor.
Brilliant.
Mr. Dalton Trumbo?
Yes.
I'll see you in Washington. Enjoy your picnic. Let's go, boys.
Yes, sir. Of course, the centerpiece of this movie is Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Cranston from Breaking Bad. You're working with him on another movie for next year where he plays LBJ in All the Way, famous from his Broadway performance. What's it like to work with an actor that good?
He just has so much range and so much ability to take these larger-than-life characters. LBJ and Trumbo are in separate, very different ways, big characters, and he has a kind of passion and an intensity that is intimidating and daunting to people, coupled with this warmth and this great wit. I mean, in both stories, especially in Trumbo, these were very witty people. They could turn a phrase in a way that could expose the ludicrousness of something as evil as the Blacklist, something so serious. And he's very funny, doing very, very intense things. As LBJ, similar thing. LBJ was a nut in a certain way. He was so driven, so much larger than life, but also so passionate about civil rights and poverty and trying to make America a better place. So it's a mixture of this kind of earnestness and unapologetic preachiness almost, mixed with really funny attitude and dialogue.
Our deep thanks to our good friend Jay Roach. Trumbo opens in theaters tomorrow, and look for Jay's LBJ biopic All the Way on HBO in 2016. When we come back, Dick Nixon and Hillary Clinton right after this.
Sam Tannenhouse is a widely respected journalist, a great biographer and historian, and also a Bloomberg View contributor. He's got a master opus up on the website BloombergPolitics.com right now. It's about Hillary Clinton's Nixonian roots. Sam, welcome. Tell people who don't know about the historical connection how Hillary Clinton got all tied up with Nixon.
Her introduction to American politics, to Beltway politics. We're not talking about working on campaigns and all the children's defense crusades, all that great stuff she did. Her first picture of politics was when she was on the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, that drew up the articles of impeachment for Richard Nixon in 1974. She worked for a guy named John Doerr, vanishing species of a great liberal Republican who wanted a totally above board, right, investigation, examination. Hillary was there in the spring and summer 1974, 1 year out of law school, helping draw up the articles of impeachment.
So you go further, though, than saying that there's a historical connection and that this was her entrance into politics. You then go on to say that she is now Nixon's heir.
Yeah.
In what ways?
Well, she's Nixon's ideological, or not so much ideological as strategic daughter. If I were Aaron Sorkin, you had great Jay Roach, if I were Aaron Sorkin doing my Hillary Clinton biopic, I start with her in that windowless room in the old Capitol Hotel across the street from Congress with headphones on, and she's one of the first people on the planet to hear Nixon's tapes. And the one tape she listened to most closely was his defense in case he actually was impeached, how he was going to make the case that what he'd done was okay. So she does that. You stop and you wind the clock back to 1972, when Hillary and her boyfriend, Bill Clinton, are in Texas trying to get a great idealist, George McGovern, elected president. And they know he's not going to win, but they can't believe how he got crushed. They worked in Texas. In Texas, Nixon got 67% of the vote. Nobody does that anymore, guys. Nixon got 60% of the vote nationally. He won 49 out of 50 states. And Hillary says, Bill and I had a lot to learn about how you run a campaign. So if you're Hillary Clinton, doesn't mean she wants to be Nixon.
Right.
She's taken inside the mind of Richard.
What has she said or written about Nixon since those days?
She said a few things about it. One is that one of her most memorable moments was hearing that one tape, what she called the tape of tapes, in which Nixon extenuates. Hillary, we learned a couple of weeks ago, is a brilliant political witness. Nixon wasn't, right? Hillary actually believes what she says, and most of the time, some of us will say, we think she's right, right? So one thing she learned from him was that, but there was a second thing. She had another job for John Doerr on the Watergate Committee. That was to write up a memo that showed the blueprint of how Nixon's White House worked.
I want to ask you a question that's not about. I want to ask you a question that's not about this piece. You have something interesting to say. You're talking about this new book, the John Meacham book that's come out on 41. Talk about what you think is going on with that book and the relationship between Poppy Bush and his son.
Well, since we're putting everybody on the couch and the Bushes don't like to be there, here's my thought. If you read W's book, which is actually pretty good, 41, this loving memoir of his father, you read it closely, he takes his father apart as a political figure. He describes someone who got ahead through family connections on Wall Street, even when he describes his father out in Texas. Well, when Dad needed money, he came back to New York, he went to Connecticut, he went to Washington, where the money was. He describes his father's political career as having been a series of patronage jobs, which is true. Right, he ran the Republican National Committee. He had an ambassador's job in China. They gave him the CIA. The job his father wanted was to be vice president, right? And he lost out to Nelson Rockefeller. Then at the end of the book, W says, when I was trying to put together my team, I called Dad and I said, what do you think about Dick Cheney as vice president? And his father said, great choice, son. He's loyal and will never stab you in the back.
Okay. Sam, thank you very much. Your piece is on our website now, BloombergPolitics.com, comparing Nixon and Clinton. Counterintuitive, but interesting. Up next, your daily candidate traffic and weather together. We'll be right back.
It looks like it's going to be another busy day in election land tomorrow, so let's go live to our 24-hour campaign forecast center, where our chief political meteorologist, Alexander Trowbridge, is standing by. Alex, when does all the action start tomorrow?
John, I'd say it starts pretty early. In the early voting states, let's move over to South Carolina, where we have a powerful delta forming. Three major Democrats, Clinton, Sanders, O'Malley, they're all going to be at this first in the South Democratic Presidential Forum at Winthrop University. Looks like a standard formation for this time of year, but keep your eye out on a moderate amount of Maddow, because Maddow will be moderating. Also, FYI, wouldn't be surprised if we see a light Rand Paul presence before things get going. Moving over to Iowa, where we are expecting heavy candidate currents to just blow through Des Moines. So if you're out and about, stick to the skywalk. And then there's Huckabee Cruz at the Iowa Renewal Project. And for you Dindal lovers out there, he will be at the Religious Liberties Conference. Finally, all week we have had our eyes trained on New Hampshire, where once again it is congested. Bush, Kasich, Christie, Fiorina gusting through. Mostly your standard town hall activity, but here's a nice November surprise. Fiorina will be beaming into the view, and Kasich will be on Colbert in New York. That's it for me. And remember, like a Poncho or Will Leach on the new Star Wars movie, we have got you covered. Back to you.
And I still think that guy's a total weirdo. What are you going to be watching?
You know that thing in South Carolina where Rachel Maddow moderating? It's a Friday. We'll see how much news it can make. But it's not quite a debate. But it does give Sanders and O'Malley a chance to contrast themselves with Hillary Clinton in a key state.
Puts them on a big stage. And, you know, the Democrats, a lot of Democrats say they want more debates. This isn't quite a debate, but it will also be an early test of that Bernie Sanders thing. How much is he willing to push it? It's a kind of a rehearsal for that debate that's coming up. Okay, we are on the tube twice a day now and forevermore for the full hour at 5 and 8 p.m. ET. But we are live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. When you visit that site, make sure you check out our campaign tracker for the latest 2016 updates. On tomorrow's show, actor Wendell Pierce. Until then, from me and Mark, Sayonara.